was saying that, uh, okay, so where do I start?
Back to survival. That would be fine. Show
Back
is all about survival. Don't worry, I captured that.
okay. So, a bit about survival.
Mhm.
Also, I elaborated on how moral survival is in fact a thing, and there are people who opt for survival only, uh, with no regard whatsoever for morality, and there are people who are just and the people who are moral and do not care for their own survival. They would be willing to give up their own lives. So I think this is a sweet spot, which is the balance of both balancing both survival and morality, which is what we are calling moral survival.
Mm.
And each of those choices creates different stratas in society, and you have different people. I think we can feel in for ourselves what different stratas create in society. We will not go into that, but uh, survival survival on its own is has its own repercussions, and we can clearly see how it ends up for Shotaka. And um, but who are we to judge? This is a quote that Maya Angelou says that don't judge anyone, because if you are put in the same situation, you don't know that you would act any different from that person.
Mhm.
But that is not to say that what Shotaka did was right. I am just saying that from an outsider's view, we're
It,
likely to judge, we're likely to condemn, and we're likely to criticize Shotaka for his choices and for his decisions.
I think alchemy as a whole
But we
does.
understand,
Oh, sorry.
but we understand where he's coming from.
Mhm.
I'm saying we also understand where he's coming from and why he's doing that.
Mhm.
But that should not excuse his actions. But even then, keeping that in mind, that is not to say that you as an individual put in the same situation would act any different. And you would say you would act different until we can't for sure know that you would act any different until we put you in that situation and we saw you act different. So we can't just take your word for it, and without seeing you actually choose to act morally
Mm.
if you were to be put in that situation. Yeah,
I
that's my
think
point.
I think the whole alchemy as a whole really pushed a lot of the people involved to doing crazy things, and not just necessarily in episode 4, but even episode I think it's 9 or 10 that covers a bit of the Ishval War, which really shows the level of atrocities that every single one of them had to do for the sake of a Mysteries. And looking at somebody like Shotaka, for instance, and possibly the decisions that he made. Personally, for me, I don't know if I could make the same decision or different, but I do know that I am perfectly biased against him in a way that while I see the nuance of the decisions that he made, I in no way feel the need to empathize with him on any level. That's personally my take. And for that comes in many ways to a lot of what I feel was his personal, but rather a tad selfish decision to not only put his wife in harm's way, but put his child as well to the, and therefore communicating to the audience that really it's me. I'm the only one who should survive out of this, you know? And while I guess that is sort of a nuanced perspective, and I get that there are some people who might really understand his whole viewpoint. I think um, he really did have a very me and no, not anybody else sort of perspective. I'm not saying this is like an objective thing, I'm just saying that's how I understood it the first and second time. I look at Nina and Alexander, the Chimera thing, calling Edward, and just my heart broke, man. I could not just look at Shotaka and be like, I mean, I saw what you did there. I get the whole nuance thing. I just looked at him and I was like, no. And even when Scar came later on and gave them like a mercy kill, uh, I can say for I did not just sit there and I was like, I mean, Shotaka, did he deserve to die? Did he not? I was like, I feel bad, but I was really like good riddance, if I'm being honest. That is kind of how I perceived the character. I really didn't have as much empathy for him as I feel a lot of the audience would, and perhaps that's my just my viewing of the whole scenario. But
Um,
mhm.
just to point out that I am not excusing Shotaka's actions.
No,
I
I
am
get
in
that.
no way excusing his actions. I am just saying that I see from looking at things from his perspective, I see
Uh,
why he would why greed would
mm,
inform the choices he made.
mm,
We can understand the thought process behind all of that, but we can't excuse the action.
yeah, yeah. I
And
think
action is actually wrong.
mm, I think the same thing applies. I get that. I completely understand that. And looking at looking at perhaps we can talk about a bit of the Ishval War because that was also introduced and the themes going forward. Because we've probably discussed, I know we've not necessarily talked about episode 3, which deals with, it gets into a lot of religion versus alchemy sort of thing. But I think personally for me, episode 3 was very straightforward in what it tried to do. It wasn't like, for me, it wasn't really something that I can possibly, let's say, perhaps I looked into it as like there's like a deeper meaning here. It was probably one of the most straightforward episodes, and it gave its own critique on stuff. But I do want us to talk about, maybe for the sake of time, the Ishval War instead, because personally I found it to be a bit more intriguing and a lot less black and white. What was your thoughts on seeing? I think that was in episode 10 when what do you think? Maybe you can start with Shilton.
Shilu, you want to go first? You've been a bit quiet.
No, 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 it's okay. Maybe you can go fast, then I can carry
No,
on
no,
from there.
just go fast.
Oh,
Talk.
you sure? Okay,
Yeah.
okay. All right. So thank you, thank you. Right. I think the Ishbal War, well, first of all, something that has been mentioned right off the bat from the very, very first scene where we're talking of Roy Mustang talking about them hunting down a state alchemist who has gone rogue and he was involved in the Ishval War of Extermination. I think it was very always they always said the Ishval War of Extermination. So here there are two things here which are okay. Well, firstly, I want to mention that whatever it is they're talking about, I don't really think it's more of alchemy versus religion per se. Well, that is how the writer chose to go with it. But I think here it's usually a contradiction of people's convictions.
Mhm.
Someone believes this, it's usually my belief versus your belief, and if they're not coming together, they're not having any bridge in between, then definitely I want to poke a knife into you. And I think that's pretty much a very important thing that is very much highlighted very clearly, and it's pretty much the cause of all conflict in our day-to-day lives. You argue with your mom, whether it's your sister, whether it's your lecturer, whether it's your workmate, whether it's your boss, whether it's anybody. It's usually a battle between convictions, whether the parallels may be religion versus science, flat earthers versus, around whatever you get. I mean, I think there's something very important that is portrayed there, that it's never wars and never conflict never comes out of a specific thing like religion and war. Because if you also look at them, the reason why Scar truly goes on a vengeance spree, even though he keeps using God as an excuse, and God knows everybody who has waged war on this planet so far has been in the name of God, which is very important. It was very much highlighted there. The reason why he went on a vengeful spree is because he felt very betrayed that somebody had to come and take away the brother's life, somebody who was very benign in terms of impulsive tendencies. He was very, very much a calm man. He was a man of study who was always devoted to his study and his research. And at the end of the day, he met a very violent end. And so that's the entire premise of this man going on a vengeance spree, even though he constantly keeps bringing up God. And interestingly enough, Ishval kind of comes from, they call themselves Ishvalans, and I think there's a description of them: brown skin, red eyes, from the east.
Yeah.
So yes, and another thing, that they call themselves Ishvalans because of their god. Their deity is called Ishval, sorry. So it kind of brought me this idea. Today we have been talking about Mesopotamian religion, like pantheon, like how there's an Ishtar, but then again, that's just me on a whim. Sorry, I'm not really saying that that's what it is, but it kind of also reminded me of the Hindu tradition, where Hindus have, or people who live in India, the name of the country was named after a particular person who has been deified, at least in terms of the history of the nation. The nation itself is called Bharata because India is actually a name which is Greek in origin, literally Greek in origin. But not to veer off from the topic, I think that was that very important thing that was portrayed or put across, that it's never about A or B or C or D. That's never the reason for conflict. Conflict only arises because people hold different convictions. And when my convictions does not lie, or when my conviction lies parallel to yours, definitely I'm going to try and poke a knife into you, or do something to make myself feel justified.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think also, at the same time, there's a right. I think for now I'll just say that much
Okay, fine.
for now. Yeah.
Mary?
For me, Michael, I think we know how I feel about war and violence.
Uh-huh.
So just give us your thoughts, Michael, and then we can probably.
All right. So I think mostly the players in the Ishval War really showed sort of the whole concept of the fighting for the nation thing, right? That soldiers often have to deal with, which is a very interesting concept. I think if there is any group of workers, I think, in the world who have to deal with a lot of political nuance, it is soldiers. Because at any time, treaties can be made, treaties can be broken, peace can be there, conflicts can be there. So they have to be prepared to not only just fight, but fight regardless of what they hold. And I think when Shilton points out the concept of how conflict works with different opinions, soldiers don't have a say when it comes to holding an opinion. You don't find like a soldier saying, "Hey, I know our country said we should fight this other country, but you know what I think? I think this other country does not deserve to be fought. So let's not do that because that's what I think." They are not under that program. They don't have that choice. So regardless of their beliefs, they are brought to the front line. They are forced to take out people who they are not sure if they are targets or not. And generally, that becomes when you see people, when you see everyone through that lens, through that filter. And one of the most interesting characters in the series might be Master, given how you see both sides of him. And there isn't this feeling that, unlike most of his comrades who definitely had some scars from the war, and I'm not saying that he didn't, he definitely did. Roy gives off this feeling like he was the least affected. Like this sort of thing happens. He is so used to political bureaucracy that he will legitimately say that he wants to be the Führer in his office when he is sure that Bradley is around and can possibly listen to his like the whole thing that he's trying to say. And so when you see a character like that, um, comparing that to somebody like Alex, who afterwards we are like, man, this was terrible to you. We find that war divides people even further and gives them even more diverse thoughts than what they had coming in, because it hardens some get out of it and have a different experience. But all in all, everyone can agree that it was never a good one. It was a very much one sided slaughter, and people definitely finding ways to attack the other side as much as possible. And one thing the show, I'll agree, one thing the show did well was it did not take the time to answer the question of whether Ishval's were completely innocent in the whole thing. It did give enough context for us to know that it was a one sided war, but anything beyond that is pretty hazy, and different circumstances show that, when you look at characters like Scar, who came out of the whole thing, that even though it was a one-sided massacre, if the Ishvals were given the same opportunity, would they have done something different? You know, and so I think that's the interesting thing about the Ishval War. Some loved it, like the Crimson Alchemist. Some were okay with the aspects, not completely, but to the point where it didn't. It was like, yeah, it happened, and some were definitely scarred. That's the most interesting thing I think I got from that experience. Yeah, to be fair,
Right,
that's
right.
to be fair, that's true.
Also, there's something I wanted to first confirm. Michael, you talked about Roy Mustang in this, the way he is. He's very straightforward with what he wants. He tends to be rough around the edges.
Very.
But one thing you cannot ignore, he does get the job done. And I think to a lot of viewers, Roy might come off as somebody who is very insensitive and selfish. But if you remember, there's a certain scene where he was talking to Hughes when they were starting, right before starting, I think when they were just being absorbed into the into the state alchemist and being absorbed into the political system itself so that they could prepare for war. And well, I not necessarily for war, but when they were starting off as alchemists, right? A state
Yeah.
alchemist. And I remember there was a point where he says they're going to do their best to make things work well at the top so that the little people in society, people who don't have much access to this power and privilege, can be able to help those who are also in a position not to help themselves, since they'll be able to take off the load. Personally, I think from the very, very beginning, from episode one, Roy comes off as a very strong, pragmatic character, pragmatic, all the time pragmatic. He seems like he's very, very rough and very insensitive to everything around him. But I think in the entire show, he's the only man who can truly see the entire picture, at least stay true to what he really wants to idealize or what he wants to see materialize, that which is his ideal. And his ideal was he definitely wants people to live a very fulfilling life. From him saying that doing things which will make work easier for the people in society so that they can all keep helping each other. And I think, as like you said, getting in a political ambience or in a political environment, there's definitely a certain tact that you must pick up in terms of how you go about the interactions with the people around you. And he clearly identifies and he's able to identify this. And that's why I think even though he keeps saying he wants to become Fury, and probably the people are like, yeah, I don't see that happening with Bradley around. I think he says it not because he's overconfident or over ambitious, but he just truly knows that if he goes by this, if he follows this path he has set for himself, he definitely will realize what he needs to do. But I think somewhere later along the show, at the very almost the conclusion, he does get overwhelmed, or be, he does get overcome by the emotion when he's
Especially after
fighting
the whole
last. And
everything.
right,
Yeah.
and he starts losing sight and focus to what he really wants to idealize, and his pragmatism just volatilizes away when
Mm.
he goes all out against last. And Maria, not Maria Ross, sorry, God, I've forgotten her name, and the way she's so full of spunk.
Uh,
The
please, okay,
Please, Hawkeye, right?
please,
She's
okay.
the one who, yeah, she's the one who truly understands Mustang properly,
Yeah.
and that's why she was the one who was able. That's why she was able to, bring him back to his sensibilities, at least to his sensibilities. So that anyway, but it also goes to show that no matter how well grounded somebody is, it's just as easy to lose sight and focus of what you are when you're overwhelmed by the chaos of the situation or the events that you're going through at that time.
Mm. True. And that
Mm,
eventually war breaks people. It's not like you can.
definitely.
At some point, you just you just break down. Either that, or you
Right.
become notoriously tough, like later on when you meet the character of Olivier, who is
Mm,
just tough as nails. But unless you're that, there's a good chance you just break apart. And I think this is interesting. I'll just take it's not more than a minute to get on this sidetrack, but I did notice there were like people who, when I went to look at some of the interesting criticisms launched at the show, one of the things I found people talking about is how plain the story is because of like because the brothers never change, or like there isn't significant character development. They just stay the same from beginning to the end, and so it's boring. I looked at it and I was like,
mm,
how? And how are we
mm,
watching the same series altogether? Because to be fair, Full Metal Alchemist takes the one a very interesting risk, especially with the Brotherhood adaptation. The biggest
mm,
decision that the Elric brothers make, which is to completely let go of, well, to sideline their fears so that they can join the war, the army, and finally be able to find answers for what they need. That is a decision that is made in one episode and it is almost never returned to. That's a very big decision. And the show puts it in one episode and continues with it. It is a very big risk. And I think it pays off because with everything going on around in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, I don't think we needed any more drama than it already had. I don't think
mm,
we were like things like the brothers are fighting, or like they have different opinions halfway, and then the story was so intricate that it could not allow for that. And I feel like if any more was added to it, the story would have broken at the seams, to be honest. And so that
right.
was just something I wanted to point out because I really felt it was a very, very dumb analysis, to be fair.
Could I add to that?
You can.
Follow up, maybe? All right. For anybody who didn't appreciate that much, honestly, that's that's their bad. They're missing out on everything. That just shows how far, how involved, how invested the person was in watching. That's just my personal criticism about it. But thank you. I kind of wanted to delve into that as well. I think it wasn't much of a risk, from my opinion, from how I look at it. I don't think it was a risk. I think it was very much deliberate, and it's something that most people would think it's a risk because the way we live right now, like how Mary was trying to explain about survival and keeping moral and survival, moral survival modes of living. it's very important. I think it's very, very important where you see the character of Alphonse and Elric, and Edward really shining out as individuals who are still young, but my God, you'd think they have lived lifetimes, they've garnered lifetimes of experience in terms of how they relate to the characters, other characters, in terms of how they express how they are. I don't think it was meant to be bland. I think it was meant to show the idealistic way of what it means to be a human being. And I think from just this, you can tell who is a great human being, who is a good human being, and who's a bad human being. Because I don't think necessarily there is such a clear-cut description or set of of traits that make you bad. I think you that's something that only society coins for you or coins to you, depending on how you choose to act at critical moments in life. And I think this persistence about them, the consistency, the fact that they are not willing to yield their own morals, or not even morals. I don't think it's much of morals, because everything Edward says and Alphonse says in defense to what they say, they're kids, obviously.
Mm.
In terms of exposure to the world, there is not much exposure, but the kind of logic and sensibilities they have. Right. What was I saying? Sorry. From what they are talking, from how they are, obviously, definitely adults are in a better position to argue about these things. But as you notice throughout the entire show, there's one thing that never leaves Edward and Alphonse at all times. There is never a justification for taking life. However you look at it, there's never a justification for waging war. But I think along the lines, you start to understand also that you can't also sit idly by when things happen. You have to act as you're required to act in the moment. And another thing Edward and Alphonse kind of bring up to the surface is that people don't do bad things when they're not aware. Until now, they need somebody to come and correct them or show them the right path. People are always aware. It's just that their desires, they have an investment in their own desires that they must realize, or in whatever it is that they have developed as personalities for themselves.
Mm.
So I don't think whomever said that really kind of took time to really understand what was being portrayed, because I don't feel it's a matter of being bland and stagnant when it comes to the description of these two boys all throughout the entire scene. I think even you might agree.
Mm.
At the end of it, if you were to look at these people, who was great, who was good, who was bad, definitely Alphonse and Edward stand out as great, despite what people might think, despite their naivete sometimes. It might seem like naivete, but I think they are willing to see the world as it is and use their sensibilities to make an appropriate conclusion to something before they take action, which most adults don't. It goes to show you that the more people grow up, the more and more infantile they become. And honestly, for me, I think after now knowing that whomever wrote it, even before knowing, I was always like, this, whomever authored this was a genius, because they're really touching into almost every aspect that a personality of a human being can take, and they've clearly painted it very well, very well. Honestly, I think there's nothing other than something like Fate series, which I think has also been developed very well.
We'll get there.
I don't think
We'll get
anything has, I don't think anything has come close to exploring what it is to be at least a human being, at least in terms of the psychological space that we kind of possess, and the body that we are. Anyway, I think what it is to become a human being, at least in terms of physical existence, right? I don't think any other show, for me personally, has really described it as well as Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
So I think the last few minutes we'll talk about what was your favorite point in the first 10 episodes, and then we can end it at that, and then we'll move on to something else.
All right, I think I'll then begin since everybody's quiet. Sorry. Right. So for me, I'll speak up to 9, because that's what's fresh in my head. For me, the most important, or the word captured my attention the most,
Mhm.
I think was in episode 9, where there's the unfolding of events where Alphonse comes out to Edward expressing how he feels, and Winry also expressing how she feels, because there's again a sense of 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 moral dilemma that comes up where Winry is so hard on herself for making a mistake that almost costs Edward's lives. And then Alphonse comes out saying what he said. And Edward's response to him was, instead of talking it through, they sparred together. And I think that was like the most impactful scene out of the 9 that I've freshly watched just recently. So yeah, definitely that was something that stood out. And can I also say that of all the characters, I think I relate the most to Winry
Ah,
more than anyone else. To Winry a lot.
mm,
Hmm.
okay.
You guys, I didn't hear anything.
It's okay. It's
Oh,
recorded. It's recorded.
I did not
Don't
hear
worry.
anything. Okay, so
It's
did you
recorded.
answer my question though?
We did. We did. We said that this is fun. I'll try it in 3 minutes. We said that it's not necessary. Anybody can pull it off, but not everybody wants to. That's what I had put. It's not necessarily unique to some, but there are some people who can do it better than others, which I think is the point of like talents and stuff in to some regard. I mean, yeah, yeah, some can do it. Everyone can do it, but not everyone wants to. So we were talking about of one moment that you liked. We're down to our last few minutes. One moment that you liked in the first 10 episodes, and then I can offer my own, and then we end it, and we move on to the next thing.
Um, honestly, not a single moment, but rather something that was very evident throughout the whole past 10 episodes. It's loyalty, the sense of loyalty that Edward had
Mhm.
to his brother and how he was there for his brother throughout. They only had each other,
Mm.
and he was willing to die for his brother. I mean, that kind of loyalty is very hard to come by. So I really appreciated that. And also the fact that when Alphonse confronts Edward about the possibility of him being just a puppet,
Mhm.
Edward could have acted up, but he chose not to because he knows acting up or causing a scene
Mm.
does not benefit anyone. So he decided to calm himself and he walked away. And instead of acting up, making a scene, he just calmed himself and walked away peacefully. So I also really admired that. And I don't know if most people can do that. If you're
Mm.
wronged, your instinct is probably to go cause a scene.
Yeah.
But the fact that Edward was able to calm himself and he knew better than to
Mhm.
cause a scene, which
Mhm.
is something I resonate with and support.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was a moment that I liked and really appreciated actually.
My
right.
favorite point in Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood was how extra it was sometimes with the comedic moments. I know there are people who usually point out that Fullmetal Alchemist is not one of the tee funny ones, but I'll submit to you with a show that was that uh, course. Well, what is the word I'm looking for? You can't hear me. Now you can. All right. Let me. So as I was saying, I liked the comedic moments that happened in the show. The moments where you just see something extra and you just feel happy essentially, right? Like the the like the Elric and Edward and the Granny trading insults, like the Armstrong bulging his muscles. These are things that are normal to anime, but it's just how it works in such a bleak show such as Full Metal Alchemist that really takes it over the top and really made it. I think that was what got me into anime in the first place. So if I can say that, that's kind of what I loved about the first 10 episodes. So we'll definitely talk more about this in other sessions, but that's about it. Shilton, if you would kindly end the meeting so we can move on to the post, that would be fine.
All right. This turned out to be a very illuminating session, I think, for all three
Yes.
of us, and most importantly, very enjoyable.
Mm.
I was very scared and skeptical of how it would proceed, but it turned out better than anyone would expect, to be honest, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I think today was a success personally, and I can't wait for the podcast to launch and see what people think about it. I think the other podcast is pretty much breaking traction, but thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to this session of Savoir. And we hope that you do enjoy what we have created today for you. All the best and Godspeed.